This is the Ed Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us. Folks, it is my supreme pleasure. This is the Ed Non-Tech Conversation Series. And again, we've had some pretty, what I would consider high-profile guests in the realms of e-learning and I suppose various creative endeavor. And I mean, I'm just absolutely stoked here. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to try and sort of keep abreast of my abject fandom when it comes to speaking, who is the guest on the show today, and he is, among many, many other things, I'm speaking primarily on the education show to the writer aspect of his career, but Bob is also, I don't know how many people even can say this, Bob. You might even know the stat on this. How many multi-Grammy award-winning authors even are there, bro? Can I start that as my opening gambit for you, sir?
There's a few, actually. My colleague in Memphis, Robert Gordon, who we work on a bunch of stuff. He actually won for his Big Star liner notes about maybe a decade ago, and he won again last year, and also picked up as a producer. And he's a great author. Wrote the book It Came from Memphis, Bio of Muddy Water. So there's a few, and Ashley Kahn, he's won multiple. Jazz Expert, he's won multiple. So there's a few of us, but yeah, it's a nice company to be in, for sure.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, that's not on the list of semi-scripted question, folks, but it just sort of jumped into my mind just immediately. I mean, again, without sort of going into, throwing out effusions or whatnot, making false claims and hyperbole and whatnot, though. I mean, again, from the outside looking out, sir, you've had a pretty significant career as late, and I guess just for starters, are you currently based in Memphis? I wasn't quite sure. It looks as though you are.
Yeah, I'm primarily based in Memphis. I grew up out west, Los Angeles and Arizona, and we have a house in Tucson where my folks are. So I split time a little bit, but yeah, I've been based in Memphis since 2006, essentially, where I've been. My full-time job is as the music critic for the Gannett USA Today owned newspaper there in Memphis. But yeah, I'm a West Coast guy, kind of historically and sort of by dint of family.
Awesome. And I guess my next question is sort of in terms of writing as an endeavor. I mean, was that something for you when you were sort of a kid, a child, a teenager, where that kind of landed for you as something? Like, were you into like literary quote unquote writing, or how do you kind of swing into the journal?
Yeah. Not having much in the way of math or science in my brain, sort of writing was kind of the probably my strongest suit as a little kid. And I did do journalism in high school, and then sort of went away from it in college. I mean, I was still involved, but my major was communications or media arts, which is sort of a fancy way of saying broadcasting. But even that, I didn't see it as a career. And then I worked in radio briefly. And kind of news radio, essentially doing some feature stuff for a radio network out in Phoenix when I started. And I wrote a story for the Alternative Weekly there in Phoenix. This is in the late 90s, about a guy who had been a kind of big figure locally. And the story did very well, had a good response. And so they had an opening for a music editor not very long after that. And so that was my sort of path to it. I had no intention. I just really wanted to write this one story about this one guy. And it turned into a career. And since then, I've Worked at a few different alternative weeklies at the time when that was a sort of a booming industry. Worked for the Village Voice Company, worked for the New Times Company, worked for the Reader Company, and then, as I say, after that, I went into daily newspaper journalism with what was then Scripps, which is now Gannett and USA Today in Memphis. And then I've done, just as an outgrowth of that, I've written for a bunch of magazines. I've been a contributor to Mojo magazine in the UK, which is kind of the leading music magazine in Britain, and for many years, and I've written for, Rolling Stone, Billboard, and then more recently over the last few years, New York Times stuff, and somewhere in there is when I started doing the book. So, yeah,
that is sick. I mean, I'm doing a Canadianism here, and I'm just kind of horning in, but I mean, what you described, I mean, like among like my kind of limited sort of academic and whatever middle class professional people, the kinds of things you're describing just vis-a-vis, the kind of artists who you've been in contact with and the sort of, high profile platforms that you have sort of worked on. I mean, that must be very rewarding, I guess. Is that a fair statement to say, to be able to be kind of at?
Yeah, I mean, it's rewarding in the sense that it's sort of a passion that I didn't think would be a career, and has been something I've basically done full time for 25 years now. Actually, this year is 25 years since I've been sort of fully employed as a music and features writer of some kind. Like I say, variously at alternative weeklies or newspapers and stuff like that, and then doing magazine things and books. So yeah, no, I've been very fortunate in that I haven't really had to work a day in my life. It's been all pleasure for the most part. I mean, there's always a little bit of work, but yeah, I've been very lucky in terms of also working for, for something like Mojo or for like the New York Times. You do get to talk to people and reach out to people that, I might not otherwise in my daily sort of job covering music in Memphis. But yeah, I've been very lucky and just gotten to talk to everybody I want to and be involved in a lot of projects that would have been a dream growing up.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely sick. And I didn't mean to do a sort of talk over you, but I mean, literally every time you roll in one of those off, it's sort of one thing to see it on your LinkedIn, but then it's like, yeah, just, as a matter of course, right? So congrats, sir, on that, achieving that. Yeah, for real. And now I guess my sort of, in terms of like the music side, I mean, first of all, are you any kind of musician yourself?
No, not really. I mean, I can sort of fake it for a few seconds on guitar, but my wife is a musician. She was a professional musician, was in bands for many years, and is a songwriter now.
Sick.
So I've been around it, and of course, just being in the kind of in the music, in and around music as a writer. Most of my friends are musicians, so I'm sort of by osmosis have kind of have musical relationships. But no, I'm not any kind of real musician myself. I wouldn't claim to that.
Well, and you and I both know that you live in one of the preeminent music cities in the entire world. I mean,
sure.
In Memphis, right? And I mean, we could go off just, talking about even like contemporary Memphis artists. I mean, I'm such a huge fan of Lucero. I'm such a huge fan of like anything that Raining Sound or Greg Cartwright has been part of. So, I mean, it's cool to me that, you're based out of a city that, it's not LA. It's kind of a more secondary kind of venue.
Yeah, I mean, as a city and a
city, past and present, right? Like.
Yeah, but I mean, as a city in size, it's a sort of tertiary, secondary market. It's about 1 million people, but in terms of its musical history and contributions, I mean, it's as important as any, as London or New York or LA. So that's kind of a cool little thing to have, and obviously music tourism and music as part of the civic identity. It's a huge thing in Memphis. So yeah, it's that's one of the reasons why I took the job, is because I knew it would it wouldn't be disposable sort of art speak, because music means so much to Memphis, just to the sort of, like I said, the identity of the city and the economy and everything else and the history of it. So yeah, it's a pretty unique, just in terms of size. Most of the cities that have had that kind of impact are much larger or much more whatever cosmopolitan or big cities, but Memphis is kind of the best of all worlds,
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just sort of as an adjacent question to that, I mean, I guess you've kind of just documented in your book about the Replacements, somewhat of your, just kind of to set up the context, right, for the project within your book. I do wonder, in terms of just stuff you listen to growing up around the house, I mean, like, was it AM radio? Like, was it more metal or heavy stuff, or what do you
No,
do
no.
kind of growing up?
Yeah, I grew up mostly in LA until about high school, and so living in LA in the kind of in the 80s, there was actually an AM station, KRLA, which at the time was I guess I'd say oldies format, but really a true oldies format. It was basically they played stuff from the mid 50s to the late 60s and nothing past 1968 at the time. Because obviously this is going back a ways. Now oldies radio is probably anything in the 80s or 90s, but at the time it was a pretty huge, they had a much bigger playlist than your typical oldie station, and they had the real life DJs from the 50s and 60s like Wolfman Jack and Real Don Steele and all that kind of stuff. So I sort of grew up with this weird belated American graffiti, youth listening to oldies radio, and then out of that, kind of made my way into sort of 60s and 70s stuff, and then I was listening to contemporary stuff as well. I had a neighbor who was a big Cheap Trick fan, so that was the first, fortunately for me, because that he could have been into anything and I would have been into it. I could have been could have been whatever, and I would have followed him along. But it happened to be Cheap Trick, which is still one of my favorite bands. So.
Cheap Trick is rad. That you could do way worse than Cheap Trick, man, for sure.
Yeah, so I was very lucky in that sense. I had a good kind of radio background and a good sort of guys I looked up to, had good taste in music. And my uncle, who was also a journalist, he loved 60s and 70s stuff. So it was a pretty well-rounded, but always kind of backwards looking. So that's why I was always kind of into music and music history, I think, in a way too, because of just that early exposure to a lot of older stuff first and foremost, rather than contemporary stuff at the time.
So I'm sorry, just sort of something twigged in my kind of reformed English teacher brain when you mentioned music history. Is that musicology? Is that like what some of your projects are involving, the archival kind of recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that is musicology.
Yeah, in a form, I think musicology is probably a more formal and academic sort of way of putting it, and maybe it's more about the kind of sort of like etymology. It's about more the roots of that music, whereas mine is I think music history, you're just sort of you're more of a historian for the people and the things, not so much the sort of nuts and bolts of the music per se. And in the replacements thing, obviously there's a lot of discussion about the music as well, but and the roots of it, but it's really more about the people and the personalities, I think, and that kind of that type of history.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I mean, again, I'm just sort of like, quasi used to be academic. I'm like, maybe this kind of lines up in this particular way. I think it's extremely cool that you have a journalistic background in your family. I mean, that must have really been sort of a kind of, as you're kind of cutting out your path with this stuff, it's kind of nice that you might have had that as a kind of tangible example, right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, he was. I mean, for him, it somewhat came later. He was actually a history major. He's passed a few years ago. My uncle was very close to him, but for many years, last 20 years of his life, he worked for CNN in the Middle East. He was kind of a bureau chief. So, but he had great taste in music and movies, and was probably more impactful that way. But also was kind of a writer and kind of a journalist. And so yeah, no, it helps to have that as something of an example, I guess, even though, he wrote much more about like international affairs and politics and things like that. And mine tended to be more about the arts, but he enjoyed the arts very much. So it took some of his enthusiasms and some of his professional background and kind of followed that path in my own way.
Well, and I see too, right, where he's carving a path through broadcast, television broadcast, and you seem to be more, naturally oriented towards long form journalism as right. Kind of, your primary mode, your kind of primary output. I do wonder, before I do start to ask you maybe one or two questions about the replacements book before we get through here too much, just because my friends who know about this will be very unhappy with me if I don't. But I do wonder about the current media ecology, right? Because you're as sort of involved in it as anybody in a certain way. Because, and you've also, over the course of 25 years, you've seen basically the print landscape essentially flatten, and now it's essentially almost like a hollowed out stream, and you get your 4 clicks and then you get the paywall and then nobody kind of goes through it. I just sort of wonder, as somebody who's, across several formats, several kind of projects, what your general perspective on that is, if I can ask.
Well, I mean, it's hard not to be bleak. I mean, I've been like one of the luckiest people I know in that I've been able to, with the exception of maybe 6 months, be sort of full-time employed as a journalist, and not just a journalist, but a music journalist. So I'm kind of, one of the few. As an example, when I went to the paper in Memphis, whatever it was, 18 years ago, in 2006, I think the paper had about 400 employees, and I think we're at about 40 now, or maybe less. So that's a pretty dramatic, and some of that's because the design and other elements have been farmed out more centrally. So I mean, obviously that some of that they just sort of shift. It's not to say that we run the paper with just 40 people, but a lot of what was done in-house is now done on a network basis, done elsewhere in other cities. That we used to have the printing press on premises, so that was another big chunk of people. So it's definitely changed, shifted, and gotten smaller. There's no question about that. And like I say, I probably caught the last wave or one of the last waves of sort of being able to do this in the way that I have, still writing primarily about one thing, and who knows how long it'll last, but it's been good for me, and I've just found my niche. I never worked in New York or LA, really. I mean, the biggest city I worked in was Chicago, really. So I kind of pursued the places that I thought would sort of be gratifying to work in, or the opportunities that presented themselves. Obviously I might have had a different career path, better or worse, if I'd have gone to New York when I was in my 20s, but I didn't, just because I had a sort of dream job in Phoenix where I started out. And then from there I went to the Village Voice in Seattle. So I've kind of just followed my nose wherever it led me, without sort of, irrespective of what might've been the smarter career move at the time. But obviously I've still kind of managed to chip away and hang in there. So I think my decisions were okay in the face of what's been a pretty decimated industry, quite frankly. Again, I just sort of count my blessings that I've been able to do this, and I've built up a little bit of a network of editors and publications that I write for, which are some of my favorite publications. So I'm very lucky, and again in that way. But yeah, overall the business has changed quite dramatically, as has the world, in the last 25 years.
Well, 100%. And thank you for that really thoughtful, comprehensive, and wide-ranging answer. I mean, I just, I think it's just kind of an inescapable aspect of, people who consume media now. And so what I have to say is you have done such a brilliant job. You and your colleagues have done such an amazing job over past years of bringing out the to such an optimal format, in such a way that, with the sort of, if I may, as somebody who like digs the vinyl, buys all the vinyl, but then having the additional physical media and, all the extensive additional production elements that go into that kind of package. To me, that's all like incredibly, I mean, that's very resource intensive, is it not, to put that together and scope that out and then get all the requisite sign-offs. I mean, that involves like a lot to put those things out. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, and that was an outgrowth of doing the book. The book came out in 2016, and then a year later we started what I kind of helped put together, the idea of a kind of reissue campaign, archival campaign for the replacements. And I've done that for some other bands as well, but primarily the replacements since 2017. And we've done, 4 or 5 box sets at this point, and various breakout pieces. And so, yeah, I mean, brilliant. It is. Oh, thank you. Well, it is, it's fan service. It was always a thing of, kind of like I say, an extension of the book for me, in that I had the privilege, because of my access through Warner Brothers and Twin Tone, to go listen to some of this stuff, unreleased things that were in the archive, for purposes of writing the book. And, as someone who's a fan, first and foremost, I thought, man, if I like this stuff as much, all the other fans are going to like it. So hopefully there's going to be a point where we can get the stuff out. And of course, it took a couple of years really to get that ball rolling. And the first release we did was the Live at Maxwell's 1986 record, which is a kind of live album they'd had in the can for many years. And that did so well that we, sales-wise and reception-wise, we were able to get a little more ambitious. And then we did the first box set, which was a Dead Man's Pop, which is a remix of their 1989 album, Don't Tell a Soul. And then from there, it's just sort of generated, its own momentum. And, we've done a few more, including last year's remix of the Tim album. So we've kind of taken care of the 2 records that they weren't happy with the mix. And then we've done expanded versions of all the other albums, classic albums, with, new parts and new elements. And yeah, it is a lot of work. And that's why actually this year we're not doing one this year, just because, and also to, we've done a lot in a fairly short amount of time. But hopefully there's a couple more projects maybe left in the can that we can sort of work up. But it's been great to just sort of be able to get out into the world what, you know, I was lucky enough to hear a decade ago and have people respond as they have, which has been wonderful.
Well, and again, sir, speaking as like a lifelong diehard Replacements fan, you know, not just the T-shirt, but with like, you know, Paul Westerberg lyrics inked on my arm, you know.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this is like, so, I mean, like, with all respect, I mean, he's like, to the outside world, he's sort of like almost this J.D. Salinger-esque kind of character at this point. And I mean, I promised I wasn't going to be like, when's the last time you text messaged him? I'm not going to fucking.
It's been a while.
but I mean, like, seriously, like, at the same time though, it's like there's this constant flow of, like, to us, the fans, new material coming out vis-a-vis these projects, which, folks, there are at least maybe possibly a couple more on the go, which show business news on the academic show, man. We're doing what we can here. I'd be doing us both a disservice if I didn't ask you about the Wilco Ultra Mega box set with the extensive interview with Jeff Tweedy. It was just Tweedy for that, or other members of the band as well? Would you like to describe that project a little bit more?
Yeah, so that was in 2022, I guess. I was approached by Cheryl Pavelski, who's a reissue producer. She's actually formerly the head of Rhino Records, who does all our replacement stuff, and she did the initial Replacements reissues back in 2008 when she was at the company. But she kind of works as Wilco's, kind of what I do for the Replacements. She kind of works as Wilco's in-house producer, archivist, person who puts those reissues and box sets together. And they were coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Yankee Hotel Foxtrot album. And they had, you know, put together a big, you know, 11 disc, I believe, or there was a couple permutations of it, but there was the big one was the super deluxe 11 LP set. And then she asked me to write the liner notes for that. And I had a kind of history with Wilco. I've known Jeff and used to live near him when I was in Chicago, and had traveled with the band a little bit and around The Ghost Is Born. And so, you know, so I had a history with the band as well as with Cheryl, and they asked me to do the liner notes for that. Really kind of a book, essentially a small book, and it was book form with the package. So that came out in, I guess, at the end of 22. Yeah, we both, Cheryl and I both got nominated for Grammys and both won for.
God damn it. And sir, I just got to pause here because I'm sorry. For the non-indie rock, whatever, Canadian PhDs who typically check out the show, okay, we're talking projects with one of the arguably most important indie rock bands ever, the Replacements, which we're not even going to, you know, dissemble on that. But we're talking about projects that resulted in a Grammy Award for the writing of these projects. The Replacements themselves never won a Grammy. And so I find it funny that a guy named Bob associated with the Replacements wins a Grammy associated with that project. And now we're stepping into, you know, Wilco. And again, this is actually in my scripted questions, bro. I will let you talk, but
sure.
It's like you got to work, you know, sort of transversely, weirdly, with Paul Westerberg, who we all know is a Generation X songwriting genius, and then Jeff Tweedy, another individual who is regarded with similar esteem and who has openly been in favor and in awe of the Replacements going back to the early days, since before, you know, even Wilco was a thing. So I just wonder if you'd care to share any insights about, you know, working with each of them or both of them, or what that was like.
Well, you know, obviously over the years come to know both of them fairly well. Paul probably better than Jeff, but you know, Jeff as well. I mean, obviously they're two different writers, and I think Jeff certainly, I mean, he's copped to the fact that Replacements and Westerberg were a big influence early on. I mean, one of the first important shows he saw was X in 1983, and the Replacements opened, and you know, I think he writes about it in his book, the impact of that. And I think, you know, when you look at the progression of Jeff's writing, something even in Uncle Tupelo, something like Gun off the second record, you know, that definitely has bears the influence of Westerberg. And so, you know, he's one of many writers, I think, that Jeff looked to and took some influence from, and has certainly built his own thing. But they're definitely different characters. Jeff's obviously much more outgoing and still out there doing his thing, and Ball's basically retired and reclusive at this point. But I definitely think they, even though they're essentially, I think they're both Gen X, but obviously come from different generations musically, somewhat, about 10 years apart, separated from when they each started, and they're about 7-8 years age difference as well. They're both in their way, kind of really impactful and influential songwriters, far beyond whatever their commercial sales might be. So they have that sort of linkage as well. So yeah, a lot of similarities, both just in terms of creatively and their impact sort of on the culture of rock, or alternative rock, or underground rock.
Very much so. And again, I mean, I just think that there's something about, the Chicago and the Minneapolis. I was speaking with the drummer for a contemporary Minneapolis post-hardcore band, my friend Andrews in Rad Owl, and he actually, sees some of these folks in the, their setting or whatever. And he actually was like reflecting. We talked about how, there's just something about that Midwest-ish kind of connection between those two cities, where there's so much history built up and so much, and with Wisconsin kind of in between. I mean,
yeah.
So in terms of live shows, as somebody, Bob, who's gone to tons and tons of live shows, because we are getting towards the later part of the thing, and I want to give you a chance to kind of close things out a bit here. But who are some of your favorite live acts in your era of covering stuff professionally and as a fan, I guess?
Oh man. Well, I mean, obviously, you get the sort of giants that I've loved seeing. I've seen Dylan a lot over the years, in various forms and various periods, which is always entertaining. Elvis Costello is probably another person I've seen a lot, just because he tours a lot, and I've been sort of seeing him since, I was going to shows. The Replacements, obviously, I didn't see them much when they were together the first time. I saw the last couple tours. I was just old enough to catch that, but I never saw them with Bob. And then, of course, I saw a bunch of the reunion shows, which was, particularly as I was still working on the book at the time, that was pretty amazing experience.
That looks inspirational. Some of the YouTube clips of that shit, man, like the Midway show. I know you can't speak to any of it, but as a fan, if that show were just to magically be released at a certain price point, I'd be like, okay, click, give me your money 6 months in advance.
Yeah, I mean, they did film that. It could happen. I don't know. There's a lot of things that happen or don't happen for various reasons in the Replacements world that don't always make sense. But you never know. But yeah, other than that, well, I mean, I was very lucky when I was in Phoenix. There was a band called Dead Hot Workshop, where they were at one point signed to Atlantic. They were a band I probably saw maybe more than anyone, and they were a fantastic band, great songwriter, Brent Babb, and great band. So, as you go through life, there's different things you see that kind of, stay with you as far as live performance. But, certainly Dylan, certainly Costello, Replacements.
Awesome.
All that stuff.
Cool. And here's a project of yours that I just found out about by scanning your list. Green Day's 30th anniversary notes. So I guess how extensive was that? And Green Day's rad, man. I wonder if you agree.
Yeah, that was a pretty interesting project. I mean, I think that first record, the first major label album is great and has a really interesting backstory, and obviously such an unexpected success in a way, and how big that got. So yeah, and I know Billy a little bit just through his sister and through the kind of Replacements connection that he had. He was a big fan of Paul's and was on tour with them a little bit during the reunion. So so I talked to him and the other guys in the band and their producer and some of the record company folks, and we put together a pretty big. It was a pretty big box set here, actually. It's, again, along the lines of some of the, like the Wilco one or the Replacements one. Super deluxe.
I want that in my hands. I want to just reach out and pull that into my basement rec room that's hidden behind the Nashville nightclub here. That's sick.
So that's one of my favorite. It was a great opportunity to do that. People I hadn't really talked to or interviewed before. So it's always fun to be able to dig into a project like that, where you're doing a kind of really expanded set of liner notes, and it's sort of hyper focused on one project or one period, and you have access to the band. So that's my favorite kind of work to do is that kind of in-depth liner notes, which I've been lucky enough to do for you know, obviously the replacement stuff that I produce, but as well as Green Day and Big Star and Wilco and all that sort of stuff. So
Big Star, speaking of Memphis legends, my Lord, man. I mean, that just must be absolutely sick. And so I guess, like, in terms of in terms of streaming, are any of the platforms less evil than the others?
Yeah, I mean, I would say of the sort of niche high audio ones, Qboz is probably offers the best sort of combination of things in terms of quality. You know, Apple Music, I don't really use Spotify anymore, partially for that reason. Apple Music, I guess, pays a little bit better royalty rate. They also have high res audio and Dolby Atmos. So I guess if you're going to have to go with one of the main commercial services, you know, probably Apple or Tidal are the best. And then for people who are a little bit more into the kind of, you know, super high res stuff is Qboz, which is basically a French-based company that has a, you know, US thing. And, you know, they all have the same stuff, basically, you know, in terms of the catalog and material they have. So it's just a question of, you know, how you listen to music. And I know Spotify is, you know, kind of the default for 90% of people, and it's fine. I've used it in the past myself, but at this point I'm sort of off the Spotify and into
good. I'm glad
Apple
for various reasons. That's just like that.
Yeah.
That use like it's like it's free to make content. Like go like it's
well, yeah. There's that. I mean, also it's just
millennial guy just pisses me off.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I guess they just announced that they will have higher res audio at another paid tier, but up until now, I mean, it's sonically it's just terrible. I mean, the quality of the stuff is way sub CD, way sub MP3, you know, basically quality, you know, the standard stuff. So, and you can really tell the difference. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes, like, you know, if you're listening on AirPods, but like if you have a proper stereo system and you play, you know, the same thing on one streaming service to the other, you notice the difference. So for that reason, among others, that's why I kind of have moved towards Qboz and Apple as my preferred sort of streaming methods.
Cool. Thank you for the insights. I'm sure that's, you know, people are going to dig hearing that. And I guess really, you know, the last kind of officially whatever scripted-ish kind of question here is if you have any other like sort of contemporary authors or you know, not necessarily in the journalistic realm, fiction. I mean, like if you got books lying around or if your partner has books lying around, what does that look like for you?
Well, my favorite probably book of the last few years is a kind of loosely linked book of essays and profiles called Always Crashing in the Same Car. It's also kind of a memoir of this guy, Matthew Spector, fantastic writer, LA guy. And it's kind of about, you know, an art crisis in Los Angeles, California. And he writes, you know, sort of these different, like I say, linked profiles and also sort of combined with his own memoir of like people like, you know, the husband and wife writing, directing team, Eleanor and Frank Perry, Carol Eastman, the writer, Tom McGuane, the writer, Tuesday Weld, the actors, Warren Zevon, Hal Ashby, you know, so it's like a series of books. This came out, I think, in 2020, I believe, and it's just fantastic. And Matthew's a good guy. I've gotten to know him. You know, and beyond that, obviously, all the I'm a big fan of Nick Tasha's, the late Nick Tasha's, who wrote, you know, the great biography of Dean Martin and Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll, and books about Sonny Liston. I mean, he's probably my favorite writer and kind of who I've tried to, in my own very modest way, sort of follow his lead on in the way he works on biographical subjects. And he's also a great novelist as well, or was a great novelist as well. So, so yeah, Matthew Spector and Nick Tasha's, anything you get by them, you can't really go wrong.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it here first, and man, I don't know. I'm just, you know, I've been doing my best to kind of hold the inner fan in check, and you know, hopefully this comes across as a semi-legit, you know, output here vis-a-vis the WordPress by the unemployed Canadian dude. Go Oilers! They're gonna lose mathematically because they fucking it's math.
Hard to win 4 in a row, but they might do it.
I mean, like, yeah, I don't even care about hockey, but this is a very interesting cultural moment with Snoop Dogg coming out in full, like, yeah, anyway, it's bizarre. And when Edmonton loses tonight, you're going to see the real character. It's going to be cars overturned in Alberta. I swear to God. Anyway, I mean, pardon me, bro. I don't mean to kind of shoehorn away the last few minutes here.
Oh, that's right.
But the Canadian perspective, bro.
That's right. It's always revolves around hockey.
Somehow yeah, somehow it does. It's weird. So I guess probably honestly, I have exceeded any expectation whatsoever of having covered these questions and whatever. Sir, was there anything you wanted to shout out or just sort of give out before we wind her down?
No, I mean, if anybody's interested, you can go to replacementsbook.com, find out a little bit more about the book, and it's obviously available, you know, in paperback and audiobook. There's a really good audiobook version that's available.
Film rights? Can we hope for film rights to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been in progress for many years, ups and downs. That business is sort of disempowering. You don't have much control, but we've gotten close a couple times, and it's still in progress. So still hopeful something may come out of that. It's I think a pretty compelling story for the screen. But yeah, that's been kind of one of the other things that's kept me busy over the last few years, is sort of trying to nurse that along into another format medium. But we'll see. Fingers crossed someday down the line that'll still be a thing. So. But yeah, no, other than that, yeah, I mean, obviously, if people are interested in the Replacements book, they can check it out at replacementsbook.com, or it's available on Amazon, all your indie retailers as well. I've
owned multiple copies of it in multiple formats. People have given it to me, and like again, like the Rad Owl drummer David, you know, he was like at the very end, he's just like, you know, repping Minneapolis, and he kind of like he pulled out the book, and it was anyway, yeah, he met Paul Westerberg at a hockey game in a bathroom, and it blew my mind. I was just sitting here in Canada going, that fucking happened. Like, anyway, bro.
Yeah, he's a hockey fan. He actually used to skate around when I first started doing the interviews on the book. He would go and sort of skate himself into a sort of fatigue every day, kind of in training in case he ever had to go back out on the road, which he eventually did.
Man, exercise for the win, right?
That's right.
All right. Bob, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Really, it's been great, and much appreciation to you for spending some time with us today, and to everybody who's involved in your various endeavors. And because I know it's totally teamwork on everything that you're involved in, just much respect and appreciation to everything that they're involved with as well. So again, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it a lot.
I appreciate you taking the time. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. I'm going to end the recording now. Folks, bye for now.
Awesome, man. Well.